A ruthless mafia king hands 5 women, including his invisible Guyanese maid, the keys to his kingdom in the form of unlimited black credit cards. While the world's elite spent millions to secure their own thrones, the maid's secret receipts left the devil of Soul speechless. Her small, selfless acts would shatter a billion-dollar engagement, trigger a bloody war between dynasties, and force a man who rules with iron to choose between his empire and the only soul who saw his light. 40 floors above the neon pulse of Seoul, Ryu Kwang-ho stands alone. His massive frame is a map of dark ink and expensive silk, but his dangerous pretty eyes are hollow. Engaged to Ariane Jackson to finalize a cold-blooded corporate merger, Ryu feels less like a groom and more like a man walking towards his own execution. Haunted by the fear that loyalty is a myth, he takes the counsel of his scarred advisor. He must unmask the truth before he is bound forever. This leads to the ultimate gamble, a 5-day window of unlimited wealth offered to 5 women to see who they truly are when they think the king isn't watching.
The penthouse was a tomb of glass and steel, hovering 40 floors above the neon veins of Seoul. Ryu Kwang-ho stood by the window, his massive frame casting a long, jagged shadow across the marble floor. His neck tattoos, dark and intricate, seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the city he owned that could not feel. In his hand, his phone buzzed with a rhythmic, mechanical persistence. It was a message from Ariane Jackson, his fiancée. The emerald set arrived. It will look perfect for the merger announcement. Our families will be unstoppable. Ryu didn't reply. He stared at his reflection in the glass, his dangerous pretty eyes hollowed out by a sudden, chilling realization. Earlier that evening, he had stood in the shadows of the gallery and heard Ariane's laughter, not the rehearsed melodic chime she gave him, but a sharp, predatory sound. She had been speaking to her father about liquidating the veto assets once the ink on the marriage license was dry. To her, this wasn't a union, it was a hostile takeover. He wasn't a husband, he was an obstacle to be managed until his empire could be swallowed whole. "You look like a man watching his own execution, boss," a gravelly voice came from the doorway. James, his advisor, stood there with the stillness of a man who had survived 1,000 wars. He saw the untouched whiskey on the table and the tension in Ryu's shoulders that silk couldn't hide. "It's a trap, James," Ryu murmured, his voice a low, melodic rumble. "They don't want the man, they want the crown." "Then don't give them the crown, give them a choice," James replied, stepping into the light. He leaned against the mahogany desk, his scarred face unreadable. "Your father used to say that if you want to see a person's soul, give them a god's power. Unlimited wealth, no oversight, no questions. 5 days. Ryu turned, the idea taking root in the fertile soil of his bitterness. He thought of the women who circled him like beautiful, hungry sharks. Ariane, the socialites, Roxy and Natasha, and his ambitious associate Loris. And then his gaze drifted to the kitchen, where Ama Jojo, his Ghanaian maid, was quietly polishing the silver, her presence as steady and ignored as the air he breathed. 5 days, Ryu repeated, a calculated focus returning to his eyes. 5 black envelopes, unlimited credit. Let's see who they are when they think I'm not looking. He sat at his desk and pulled out 5 matte black credit cards, each embossed with the seal of his private bank. As he tucked them into heavy envelopes, the atmosphere in the room shifted from stagnation to a high-stakes gamble. Ryu Kwang-ho was no longer just a man facing a loveless merger. He was a judge. He would hand them the keys to his kingdom, and by the end of the week, he would know if he was marrying a partner or his own executioner. Under the cold glow of the desk lamp, the devil of Seoul began his final test.
The following morning, the atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with a synthetic elegance as the 4 high society women gathered in the drawing room. Ariane sat at the center, draped in silk, her manicured fingers tapping impatiently against her designer clutch. Beside her, Roxy and Natasha whispered about upcoming galas, while Loris, the business associate, kept her eyes fixed on her tablet, already calculating the day's market shifts. They were the glittering elite, a circle of gold and ice that viewed Ryu Kwang-ho as the ultimate acquisition. Ryu entered the room with a commanding, athletic build, his presence drawing the air out of the space. He didn't offer the usual pleasantries. Instead, he signaled to James, who carried a silver tray holding 5 matte black envelopes. "I've decided to celebrate our upcoming union early," Ryu said,
his voice a dark, melodic rumble that lacked its usual warmth. He handed the first envelope to Ariane. Inside is a black card with no limit. For the next 5 days, I want you to spend. Consider it a test of your tastes. Buy what you desire with no oversight and no questions asked. Ariane's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam as she tore the envelope open. Finally, Ryu, you're beginning to understand what a Jackson woman expects. Roxy and Natasha giggled, already pulling out their phones to book private jets and shopping suites, their faces twisted in masks of practiced greed. Loris merely nodded, her mind likely already on offshore accounts and leverage. At the back of the room, near the shadows of the hallway, stood Ama Jojo. She was dressed in her crisp white server's uniform, her fearless expression replaced by a look of profound bewilderment. When Ryu stepped toward her, the room fell into a shocked, judgmental silence. "And for you, Ama," Ryu murmured, holding out the final black envelope. Ama hesitated, her hands smoothing the apron of her uniform. "Sir? I am just the maid. I have no need for such things." "Take it," Ryu commanded, his dangerous, pretty eyes locking onto her with a possessive intensity. "Use it as you see fit. No questions, remember?" As Ama took the envelope with trembling fingers, Ariane let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "A credit card for the help? Really, Ryu? She'll probably just buy some extra soap and a bus ticket." Ryu didn't look at his fiancé. He watched Ama, who held the heavy black card as if it were a holy burden, her dark eyes searching his for a hidden meaning she couldn't yet find. While the 4 socialites began to chatter about emeralds and real estate, Ama merely tucked the envelope into her pocket, her heart racing with a quiet, terrified confusion. The 5 envelopes had been distributed. As Ryu walked away, he felt the weight of the surveillance system waiting for him. The elite were ready to feast on his wealth, but it was the woman who had asked for nothing that held his gaze. The clock had begun to tick on the 5-day gamble that would either secure his empire or save his soul. The ticking clock of the 5-day test began with a symphony of excess that Ryu Kwang-ho watched with a growing sense of nausea. From his darkened surveillance suite, the high-contrast monitors flickered with the movements of the 4 socialites. Ariane had spent the first 48 hours in a blur of champagne and aggression, acquiring a vintage yacht and a diamond-encrusted timepiece that cost more than most apartment buildings. Roxy and Natasha followed suit, their transactions appearing like a frantic neon pulse. Designer boutiques, 5-star hotel buyouts, and vanity projects designed to scream their proximity to the devil of soul. "They aren't buying things, James," Ryu murmured, his dangerous, pretty eyes reflecting the cold blue light of the screens. "They're buying weapons. Every swipe of the card is a brick in the fortress they're building against me." "And the girl from Ghana?" James asked, his voice low. Ryu hesitated, his ink-covered finger hovering over a specific coordinate on the GPS tracker. While the others stayed within the glittering confines of Gangnam, Ama Jojo's signal had drifted toward the periphery, a gray industrial district where the neon lights were replaced by flickering street lamps and the biting winter wind whistled through narrow alleys. The scene on the monitor shifted. Ryu watched as Ama navigated a crowded, open-air market in the slums. She was no longer in her white server's uniform. She wore a simple wool coat, her face partially obscured by a scarf. She didn't enter the luxury boutiques. Instead, she stood before a cluttered pharmacy window. Ryu watched as she handed the black card to a stunned pharmacist. Moments later, an elderly woman standing behind Ama burst into tears as a bag of expensive, life-saving heart medication was pressed into her hands. Ama didn't stay for the gratitude. She moved like a ghost of the market, disappearing into a nearby community clinic. "She's paying for surgeries," James whispered, staring at the live transaction log. "A dozen procedures for the families of the men we lost in the Incheon raid last winter. And look at this, 3 tons of rice and charcoal being delivered to the local orphanage." Ryu sat back, his furrowed brow deep with a confusion he hadn't felt in years. Ama was moving through the darkness like a silent, healing wind, touching the lives of the people he had spent a decade ignoring. She wasn't building a fortress. She was mending a broken world. As she left the clinic, the camera caught a brief glimpse of her face. She looked exhausted, her breath visible in the cold air, but her eyes held a spark of reckless fearlessness that the diamonds on Ariane's neck could never provide. Ryu reached out, his thumb grazing the screen over the image of her face. The noir shadows of his life were suddenly illuminated by a light he didn't understand. The stillness of the penthouse at 3 a.m. was a physical weight, pressing against Ryu's chest as he sat in the flicker of the monitor's blue light. The files from the first 3 days of the test were compiled into a digital ledger of greed. Arian had spent another 400 million on a vanity real estate play. Loris had funneled funds into offshore accounts disguised as consulting fees. They were exactly who he thought they were. But then there was the footage from the maid's quarters. The room was small, tucked away near the service elevator, and stripped of the high-contrast luxury that defined the rest of the estate. On the screen, Ama Jojo sat on the edge of her narrow bed. She had returned from the markets, her coat discarded, revealing the white server's uniform that she wore like a second skin. Ryu watched, his dangerous pretty eyes narrowing, expecting to see her counting cash or hiding jewels she had bought in secret. Instead, Ama slipped onto her knees. The audio on the high-definition feed was crisp, capturing the soft rustle of her movements, and then a low, rhythmic murmur. She wasn't speaking Korean or English. The words were melodic and fluid, the Twi dialect of her home in Ghana. Even without a translator, the tone was unmistakable. It was a plea, weighted with a reckless fearlessness that Ryu had never heard directed toward him. "Nana nyame," she whispered, her eyes closed tight, her hands clasped so hard the knuckles were white. "Watch over this house. Watch over the man who carries the weight of the city on his back." Ryu froze, his ink-covered hand tightening around his glass. He had been called a devil, a king, and a monster, but never a man who carried a weight. "Protect Ryu Kwang-ho," she continued, her voice rising in a gentle, haunting lilt. "He thinks he is made of stone, but I see the boy who is lonely. I see the heart he hides under the ink. Give him peace, even if he does not know how to ask for it." Ryu's furrowed brow twitched as a sudden, sharp ache blossomed in his throat. He watched her bow her head until it touched the edge of the mattress, her prayer continuing in a low hum that felt like a physical warmth spreading through the cold room. She hadn't used the card to buy her way out of his world. She was using her spirit to try and save him from it. The noir darkness of his office felt suddenly too small. For the first time in 38 years, Ryu Kwang-ho felt truly seen, not by a business partner or a rival, but by the woman he had treated as a ghost. He reached out, his fingers hovering just an inch from the glowing screen, where Ama remained in her silent vigil. The debt he thought he was collecting was shifting, turning into an emotional weight he wasn't sure he was strong enough to carry. The following afternoon, the fragile peace of the penthouse was shattered. Ryu had returned earlier than expected, his commanding, athletic build cutting a jagged path through the foyer. He didn't see Ama standing in the dining alcove, her hands frozen over a crystal vase of lilies. He was focused on the two men trailing him, soldiers with hard faces and hands tucked into heavy coats. Ryu stopped under the high-contrast glare of the chandelier, and that was when Ama saw it. The pristine white tuff of his dress shirt was ruined, stained with a vibrant, wet crimson. It wasn't a smudge, it was a splatter, the violent signature of a world that thrived on senseless cruelty. "Dispose of the vehicle," Ryu barked, his voice a melodic rumble turned into a serrated blade. "And find out who leaked the transport route. I want them brought to the basement, no questions." As the men vanished, Ryu finally sensed her. He turned, his dangerous pretty eyes narrowing as they met Ama's. For a moment, the devil of soul stood fully unmasked, his face tight with the adrenaline of a hunt. The silence between them was deafening, a noir vacuum that sucked the air from the room. "You should be in the kitchen, Ama," he said, his voice dropping to a low, warning hiss. He walked toward her, the scent of expensive ozone and metallic iron clinging to him. He saw her gaze drop to his sleeve, her fearless expression flickering with a raw, visible tremor. "Is that theirs?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. Ryu looked down at the blood as if noticing it for the first time. He didn't flinch. "In my world, Ama, it is always someone's. If it isn't theirs, it's mine. That is the price of the crown." Ama felt a cold sickness rise in her throat, a direct clash with the warmth she had felt while praying for him only hours before. Her faith told her to flee from the darkness, to protect her soul from a man who could command a life's end as easily as a drink. Yet, as she looked into his hollowed eyes, she saw the lonely boy she had spoken to God about, the man who was bleeding internally far more than the person whose blood stained his wrist. "You speak of it like a business," she breathed, her hand reaching out involuntarily before she pulled it back, clutching her apron. "But life is a gift, Ryu. You are losing yours piece by piece every time you do this." "I lost my life a long time ago," he countered,
stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I am exactly what the world made me. He walked past her, leaving the scent of death in the air. Amma stood alone among the lilies, caught between the terrifying reality of the devil and the desperate hope of her prayers. The choice was a jagged edge: leave and save herself, or stay and risk drowning in the shadows to save him.
The 5-day deadline expired under the cold, clinical glow of the penthouse dining room's crystal chandelier. A feast of Wagyu and vintage wine sat largely untouched as the air hummed with a predator silence. Ariane sat at the head of the table, her neck draped in the emerald she had purchased with Ryu's card, her expression one of bored triumph. Roxy, Natasha, and Loris sat poised like porcelain dolls, their faces masks of high arrogance. Amma stood at the periphery, her hands clasped tightly over her white apron. She was the only one who didn't look at the lectuary. Her eyes were fixed on Ryu, searching for the man who had bled on his sleeve the day before. "The 5 days are over," Ryu announced, his voice a low, melodic rumble that made Ariane's smirk falter. He stood at the head of the table, his commanding, athletic build cutting a sharp silhouette against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I asked you to spend. I asked you to show me what you valued when the world wasn't watching." With a flick of his wrist, a hidden projector hummed to life, casting high-contrast cinematic images onto the far wall. The room gasped. The footage showed Ariane in a backroom meeting, signing away Ryu's shipping routes to her father's company. It showed Roxy and Natasha laughing as they funneled millions into secret offshore accounts. It showed Loris negotiating a kickback from a rival family. The glittering elite shifted in their seats, their faces turning a bruised shade of panic as their greed was laid bare in 4K resolution. "This is a violation, Ryu," Ariane shrieked, her stubborn dignity fracturing into a desperate rage. "It was a mirror," Ryu countered, his dangerous, pretty eyes flashing with a lethal intensity. He signaled to James, and the footage shifted. The room fell into a stunned, hollow silence. The images showed Amma in the mud-slicked alleys of the slums. They saw her paying for the surgery of a soldier's daughter. They saw her buying charcoal for an orphanage. Finally, the audio played her twee prayer, the soft, haunting plea for God to protect a lonely, tired man. Ryu walked toward Amma, ignoring the 4 women who had come to claim his brown. He stopped in front of the maid, his ink-covered hand reaching out to gently lift her chin. "Ariane, the engagement is over. James will escort you and your merger out of my sight," Ryu said, never breaking eye contact with Amma. "You all spent millions to build your own kingdoms, but Amma spent my wealth to save mine." In a move that shattered every social boundary of the Soul Elite, the Mafia King dropped to one knee before the woman in the server's uniform. "You prayed for my soul, Amma. Now I'm asking you to keep it." The shock in the room was a physical weight, but as Amma looked down at the devil, she saw only the light she had been praying for. The velvet box sat open on the table, the diamond within it a stark, brilliant sun against the dark mahogany. Amma looked at the ring, then back at Ryu, who remained on one knee. The air in the room was still thick with the departure of the socialites, a vacuum of silence that had replaced the screeching of the Jackson heiress. Reached out, her fingers grazing the cool metal of the band, but she didn't let him slide it onto her finger just yet. "You are a king in the city, Ryu," she whispered, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "You rule with iron and ink. But if you want me, you cannot simply buy my heart like you bought those emeralds for Ariane." Ryu's furrowed brow deepened. "I am not buying you, Amma. I am choosing you." "Then you must choose all of me," she countered, her reckless fearlessness returning. She stepped back, creating a sliver of space between them. "I will accept this ring, and I will stand by your side, but only on one condition. You must enter my world. You must leave this fortress, these guards, and this darkness behind for a time. You must come with me to Ghana. You must look my mother in the eye and tell her what kind of man you intend to be." Ryu stood slowly, his commanding, athletic build looming over her once more. The idea of leaving his territory, of being unprotected in a land where his name held no weight, was a physical blow to his instincts. His neck tattoos seemed to tighten against his skin. To go to Ghana was to strip away the Mafiaboss and become nothing more than a man. "You want me to leave the Empire?" he asked, his voice a low melodic rumble of disbelief. "Now, when the Jacksons are looking for blood?" "If you cannot leave the Empire to find your soul, then you have already lost it," Amma said softly. She held out her hand, palm up, a silent invitation. Show me that I am more to you than just another receipt to be filed away. Show my family that the man who saved the orphans is the man who truly exists. Ryu looked at her hand, then at the sprawling city beneath them. For years he had been a prisoner of his own power. He looked back at Amma, seeing the Ghanaian grace that had managed to do what no rival could, make him surrender. James, Ryu called out, never breaking eye contact with Amma. The advisor appeared in the doorway. Clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks, and prepare the private jet. We're going to Accra. A small, radiant smile finally broke across Amma's face. She allowed him to take her hand, and as the gold band slid into place, the Devil of Soul took his first step toward redemption.
The preparations for Ghana were cut short by the sound of shattering glass and the rhythmic thud of flashbangs echoing through the lower levels of the estate. The Jackson family had not taken the humiliation of the dinner of truth lightly. Arian's father had unleashed a scorched earth retaliation, sending tactical teams to reclaim the pride his daughter had lost. Ryu sprang into action. His commanding, athletic build shifted into a lethal blur as he pulled Amma behind the reinforced mahogany desk in his study. James, perimeter breach at the north gate, Ryu roared into his comms, his dangerous, pretty eyes flaring with a cold, murderous light. He reached for the hidden compartment beneath his desk, pulling out a sleek, black submachine gun. The Devil of Soul was ready to paint the walls red to protect the woman behind him. But Amma didn't cower. As bullets peppered the reinforced door, she pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers moving with a reckless fearlessness that stopped Ryu in his tracks. "Ryu, wait," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "If you kill them here, this war will never end. You'll be trapped in this cycle forever." "They are in my home, Amma," Ryu hissed, his neck tattoos straining as he checked the magazine. "There is no other way." "There is my way," she countered. She was already on a video call, the screen filled with the face of a high-ranking official in the International Trade Commission, a man whose child's heart surgery Amma had quietly funded just days prior. While the gunfire intensified outside, Amma spoke into the phone in a calm, authoritative tone. She didn't beg, she negotiated. She revealed that through her community network, she had documented the Jackson family's illegal offshore diversions, the very ones Ryu's credit card test had uncovered. She informed the official that the data was set to be released to the global press in 5 minutes unless a ceasefire was called. Ryu watched in stunned silence as his black maid leveraged the power of gratitude and truth. Minutes later, the gunfire stopped. The heavy silence that followed was broken only by Ryu's comms crackling to life. "Boss, they're retreating," Ryu reported, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They just got a stand-down order from their board of directors. The Jackson family is being hit with a federal freeze." Ryu lowered his weapon, looking at Amma as if seeing her for the very first time. She wasn't a fragile flower to be shielded. She was a strategist of the heart. She had broken a mafia war without firing a single shot. "You told me I ruled with iron," Ryu murmured, stepping toward her and tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I think I've spent my life holding the wrong weapon." Amma stood up, smoothing her uniform, her gaze steady. "The world is bigger than your shadows, Ryu. Now, let's go to Ghana. We have a flight to catch."
A year had passed since the neon lights of Seoul were traded for the golden sunsets of Accra, a journey that had fundamentally rewritten the soul of the man known as the Devil. Ryu Kwang-ho sat in the back of his armored sedan, the high-contrast city skyline of Seoul blurring past the window. He was dressed in a custom-tailored suit of deep charcoal, but his neck tattoos were partially obscured by a soft silk tie, a gift from Amma's mother. His phone buzzed with a notification from his head of security. "Boss, the council is waiting. The merger with the legitimate shipping lines is finalized, but they require your signature for the press release." Ryu checked his luxury metal link watch. It was 6:30 p.m. In the old world, he would have stayed until dawn, fueled by whiskey and the cold pursuit of power. But the man who once had empty eyes now saw a different clock. "Reschedule it for tomorrow morning," Ryu said, his voice a warm, melodic rumble that lacked its former serrated edge. "Sir, the board? They won't be happy. They say a king shouldn't be rushed." "Tell them," Ryu replied, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips, "that the king does not keep his queen waiting." When he entered the penthouse, the air was no longer sterile and cold. It smelled of wood smoke, spice, and the rich, savory aroma of jollof rice. Amma stood in the kitchen, her fearless eyes bright as she hummed a twee melody. She had traded her server's uniform for a vibrant kente print dress that flowed around her like a sunset. She turned as he approached, her gaze lingering on the bouquet of fresh red roses in his hand, and then instinctively on his cuffs. "You're on time," she teased, though her voice held a depth of love that Ryu's heart hammered. She reached out, her gentle hand with a gold band touching his wrist. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she saw a faint dark smudge on his sleeve. "A busy day, Ryu? Was it necessary?" Ryu paused, looking down at the mark of the world he still had to navigate to keep her safe. "It was a closing of a door, Amma. A final one, I promise." She looked at him for a long moment, searching that dangerous pretty eyes that were now filled with light. "Then I trust you. Now, go wash up. The jollof is getting cold, and I made puff puff for dessert." Ryu wrapped his ink-covered arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. He breathed in the scent of her hair, a mixture of shea butter and home. He still ruled a kingdom, and his hands were still scarred, but he held a mirror to his soul every day. He was no longer a hollow man in a glass tomb. He was a man who had found that love doesn't erase the darkness, it simply makes the light worth fighting for. Together they sat down to eat, the king and his queen, in a home where the only thing unlimited was the grace they gave each other.